Hello, everybody. Hello, welcome back. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. Today we are kicking off a brand new quilt series. I hope you're following along. Hello, everybody. It's so great to see you. I feel like I'm out of my element. Can you hear me okay? I'm going to tell you what, I've had one technical difficulty after another. Am I too loud? Hello, everybody. It's so great to see you. If you haven't joined me before, if this is your first time seeing me, I'm Lisa with Lisa Capen Quilts. I sound great. Okay, thank you so much. Perfect. Okay, thank you. I haven't streamed in a few weeks. I've missed y'all so much. My microphone giving me issues. This morning, I'm glad I woke up early and started setting things up because the camera that I took almost half of a day to mount on the top of my sewing machine did not work this morning. Luckily, I had a backup. You'll see it behind me. Hello, everybody. It's so great to see you. Okay, today we are starting a brand new Quilt As You Go series. Y'all, this is a free pattern. I hope you make this quilt. If not now, print off all the stuff and come back and revisit this quilt series down the road. Hello, everybody. Glitched. I glitched? Hopefully I'm not glitching. Hello, everybody. It's so great to see you. So, y'all, this is going to be at least a 10-week series. We're going to do a block or two each week. The free pattern is down in the description box. I hope you grab that. This would be a fun project if you get together with a bunch of friends. Maybe like on a weekly or monthly basis, y'all could come together and make this quilt project. The really cool thing about this quilt, y'all, is that you could take this pattern, take all the measurements for the blocks, all of that stuff, and instead of doing Christmas appliques and Christmas-themed fabrics and colors, you could switch out the appliques for appliques you already have on hand or something you see online. These are great size blocks that you can customize with all kinds of stuff. Okay, so if you're not in the mood to make a Christmas quilt quite yet, maybe switch out the applique for something else. What else? Today we're going to be covering a couple different things, okay? So this first video might be a little bit longer. The things I'm going to show you today. We're going to make block one together, okay? And this quilt is going to feature a couple of different techniques. Of course, applique being a big part of this quilt, my favorite quilting technique. If you did all the things, the little 5-inch blocks, all applique, that was some really great practice preparing you for this quilt. And if you were able to do the small little bitty, itty bitty pieces of applique for that past quilt that we just finished, you're going to find the applique for this quilt so much easier because it's going to be quite bigger, okay? And then we do have a few blocks in this quilt series that is going to be some piecework, some patchwork, okay? Now, I did include some blocks in this quilt that if you're new to sewing and quilting, this is going to push you a little bit beyond your comfort level, but I'm going to be here. I'm going to show you step by step how to make the block. I'm going to give you some tips, some strategies to work on these blocks that are going to help you achieve making this block. And at any time, if you have questions, you can comment during the live or comment after the live. And we're all here to help you through it, okay? You can do this. You've got this. I really feel like if you sewed along during the happy at home staying the COVID quilt, right? If you participated in those traditional quilt blocks, you've had lots of practice, and these blocks we're making for this quilt will be a piece of cake. Hello, everybody. It's so great to see you. I wanted to also mention that this quilt is very fat quarter friendly, okay? Joy to the World. You see on the little thumbnail right next to me? Joy to the World, that background, the length or the width of it is 20.5 inches. That's the longest background piece you'll be cutting. So if you're working from your stash and you're hoping to use fat quarters, this quilt is very fat quarter friendly. Now, in the description box below for week 1, it's a 3-page PDF, okay? It gives you 2 sheets of information, like how much fabric you need for the whole thing, and then, of course, block 1 pieces. That'll give you all the information you need if you want to go purchase or start gathering stuff from your stash. Hello, everybody. Let's see. Just want to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. All right, so today we're going to actually sew together block 1 together. We're going to quilt block 1 and get it squared up, okay? And then once block 1 is done, this is why this video is going to be a little bit longer. I have 2 blocks that are quilted. I'm going to show you how we're going to join the blocks for this quilt, which is slightly different than all the things. And I'm going to show you how to make some double folded bias tape. Okay, so if you have to leave before we're done and you have questions about those things, you can come back on the replay and catch that part of the video. I think that's everything. If y'all have questions, let me know. I do miss a lot of the chat. Sometimes it goes by faster than what I can keep up with. But hopefully I'll catch questions. And I know we have lots of helpful people here who love to share their knowledge. Thank y'all so much. I have not seen any moderators yet today, but if you are here, thank you. And let's get started. You ready to get started? Okay. Let's switch over to the cutting mat. Here is what if you download week 1, you'll have this page, which you might have already gotten. This is going to tell you all the information for the supplies you need, right? The fabrics and everything. And some tools and gadgets that you might find helpful in making these quilt blocks. The overall size of this quilt when it's finished is not huge, y'all. It's not huge. 32 inches wide, which is that a yard? It's a little less than a yard. And 36 inches tall, which is the full yard, right? So it's not really, really big. It's not going to be a bed-size quilt, which I just don't have time to tackle at this time anyways. Sally, thank you so much. Thank you for keeping an eye on the chat. Where are you, Miss Sally? The last I saw, you were in Alaska, I think. Are you still there? Okay, so that's page 1, and then, of course, page 2, project cost. Y'all, this is going to be free. Each week, these are free patterns with traceable PDF templates. The only thing that I'm going to charge for with this quilt is an optional SVG file. If you have a cutting machine and you like using your Silhouette, your Cricut, your Brother Scan and Cut to cut applique pieces, those pieces will be in my Etsy shop, but they're totally not necessary. Okay? We're going to be doing this series every Friday at 12 noon. If that changes for some reason, then I'll give you plenty of advance notice. And this time you'll notice I uploaded the thumbnail on Wednesday. So from here on out, I will upload the pieces on Wednesday so you have a little bit more time to cut your pieces if you want to sew with me live. You're in Utah now. Wow, that's exciting. Utah. That is so cool. Skill level. I'm hoping if this is your very first quilt project, you join along. If this is your 1000th quilt, I hope you join along. I'm going to try to break it down for even the very newest quilters. But even if you are very seasoned quilters, I'm hoping that you find that this is going to be a fun project. Okay. And then we are on to block 1 pieces. So here's what we're going to do. Oh. I made a little copy of my ruler for those of you who are very, very, very new, or some of you who are intimidated by some of the increments that sometimes we have to cut our pieces to achieve certain blocks. I made a copy of my ruler, and before we start cutting up these pieces, I wanted to show you what 2 7/8 looks like, because if you look at block 1 pieces, the sizes to cut your pieces to start with, you'll see a couple of them say 2 7/8. Many of you know this, but if you don't, I'm going to show you, okay? This is a Creative Grids ruler that I just made a copy of so I can mark on it. Now, I'm hoping I'm close enough that you can see this pretty well. This is the right side of the ruler, the very edge of the ruler, right? And then you'll see these circles, that's 1 inch. So this line is 1 inch, 2 inch, this line is 2 inches, 3 inch, this line is 3 inches. Within each one of these inches, we have several different lines, right? So if you come down here, you'll see this line, and this line is taller than the other little shorter lines, right? So this line represents 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 an inch, 3/4 of an inch, right? If you look at the little lines in between, you'll notice that that breaks down your 1/8 increments. So within 1 inch, we have 8 little segments of an inch, right? That gives us this number right here. So if you look within your ruler, and I'm going to hold this up really close so you can see here in a second. Let's just look right here. At the edge of the ruler, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and when we go to that, that's 8, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is your 7/8 mark. This block requires you to use that 7/8 to cut some of your pieces, all right? And that's because we're going to be sewing them into flying geese units. Not only does this block, several blocks, and some of them we did during the Happy at Home quilt series, right? Several quilt blocks you will make in your lifetime of making quilts will require you to use these 1/8 increments or 7/8 increments, as in this case. So if you have a bucket of scraps and you're intimidated to cut up your good fabric, I suggest, starching a couple pieces of fabric and then practice cutting some 2 7/8 squares before you dive into the fabric you want to use for this block. All right, so I'm going to hold this up. I know it's kind of blurry. There we go. I'm trying not to have my hand shake too much. Right at the edge of that ruler, you'll see 7 little lines within that inch. Count over. The last one, that 7th line, that's your 7/8 measurement. Okay, I'm hoping that that's helpful for somebody. All right, so with that said, let's take a look at the pieces that we need to make this block, okay? If you're wondering about color themes for this quilt, I always hesitate on giving like you should use these colors, and these colors, because it's your quilt, and I want you to get creative and have fun mixing up different color palettes. I'm going to be trying to stick to the colors that you see on the PDFs, and if you don't have a color printer, you can open up the PDF on your computer or your tablet, whatever, and see a color version, okay? I'm trying to stick to the colors that you see on the PDF. So we've got like a cream color, a sage color, and like a burgundy maroon color. That's what I'm doing for my quilt, okay? So let's go over these pieces because we have a little prep work to do before we get started. From the cream colored fabric, you need 4 4.5 by 2.5 inch pieces. I've already pre-cut mine. That's those pieces. And then you'll need 2 2 7/8 by 2 7/8. And that is these two. You'll notice one little asterisk next to this measurement. We're going to get to that. From the burgundy fabric, you need one 5 1/4 by 5 1/4 inch square. You'll notice 2 asterisks next to that. We're going to get to that here in a second. From the sage fabric, you need 2 2 7/8 by 2 7/8 pieces. And you need 4 tiny little squares that are 1 1/2 inch by 1 1/2 inch. So as we approach this, because we're making these quilt as you go blocks, you'll notice I give the size of the finished square once we're done right underneath of that picture. Okay, so we're going to end up with a block that is 8 1/2 by 8 1/2. All of the blocks in this quilt series are going to be different sizes, so you might want to pay attention to that. Because we're doing this as a quilt as you go, I personally like to cut my batting and my backing fabric a little bit bigger than this number so that we can square it up to exactly 8 1/2 by 8 1/2 after it's quilted. Okay, so for my quilt project, I'm using a warm and natural batting. It's super thin. It's my favorite batting so far, and snowman fabric on the back. Okay, so let's get to these asterisks. Right underneath of the dotted box, you'll see the asterisks. If it has one asterisk, we're going to cut the square one time on the diagonal. So the 2 7/8 pieces, we're going to cut in half one time on the diagonal. The pieces with 2 asterisks, which would be this burgundy piece, we're going to cut 2 times on the diagonal. We're going to cut it this way and that way, creating 4 pieces. And that's what we're going to do before we start anything. Okay? Cheryl, you've never done a sew along. Well, I'm so glad that you're following along. All right, so just to speed up time, you might be comfortable doing this one piece at a time, but I'm going to just layer these up like that and cut 2 at a time with my special ruler that Sheila gave me. I had a lot of fun. I met Sheila at the quilt store the other day. We're going to line up the ruler corner to corner, and we're cutting this piece directly in half one time. And the more precisely you line it up corner to corner, the better outcome you're going to have in your sewing, okay? One time, just like that. So now we have 4 little beige or tan triangles. We're going to do the same thing with this sage green piece. I'm going to line both of them up. And we're cutting from corner to corner. There we go. Just like that, okay? So 4 beige, 4 sage. With this piece, I need a little bit of a longer ruler. We're going to be cutting the 5 1/4 inch piece 2 times. So we're going to line it up corner to corner and cut the first one. Now, because there are a million different ways to do just about everything, if you have a different way of making flying geese units that's easier for you, that does not require that 7/8 measurement, by all means, feel free to do that, okay? Your finished flying geese unit needs to measure 2 1/2 by 4 1/2 inches. You'll see I like to, you can't see the bottom of this one, but I like to line up that long straight edge to a line on my ruler or on my mat. I have a little bit better control cutting them in half this way. And now we are creating 4 burgundy. triangles, right? So that's all of our cutting. And then the last thing that I want to pre-do, because we're going to be snowballing some pieces with these little 1.5 inch squares. So I'm going to just turn them over, and I'm going to be drawing a line corner to corner, and we're going to go ahead and knock that part out too, okay? So take your 1.5 inch pieces, line up the ruler corner to corner, and just draw yourself a little line just like this. We're going to have you doing piecework like you've always been doing piecework. Just corner to corner. Just like that. Do you wash and starch your fabrics first? I am the worst person to ask if I pre-wash my fabrics. Well, I don't want to say that. I feel like quilters are split half and half, right? You have your dedicated always pre-washers. They pre-wash everything before it gets put away. And then you have the quilters like me who do not pre-wash anything. I have not pre-washed any of my fabrics. I do, however, use about 6 or 7 Shout color catchers in the first washing, and I wash my quilts with cold water. So that helps a lot with any bleeding that might happen. Yeah, so I don't pre-wash anything. But I do like to use starch. So when I'm pressing my fabrics before I ever cut out my pieces, I do use a little bit of spray starch, and I starch the fabric before cutting out my pieces. And I do find that that's really helpful. Some fabrics don't even really need that. They have some sizing in the fabrics already. But I just go ahead and do that anyway. I hope that's helpful. Karen, you might have an easier time doing your method for no waste flying geese. And that might definitely work easier for you. Whatever gives you the most easiest way to achieve your flying geese units, I suggest doing that. But if you want to try the 7/8 increments, I'm always encouraging to try things that you haven't tried before. So this is all of our pre-work, y'all. I'm going to go ahead and set all of our little baby squares to the side with these pieces, okay? The 2.5 by 4.5 beige pieces. With these pieces, we're going to start sewing together our flying geese units. So you might find it helpful to just line them up like this, right? The long part of the triangle at the bottom of your flying geese unit. And I do give a little bit of a diagram here that might be helpful if you're not sewing with me live, if you're going to do this later. So the triangle has 2 short sides and a long side. The long side is what we're actually putting towards that middle piece. So you might find it helpful to lay out your pieces like this, right? So you don't get them turned around. And then the lights are going to go on this side. My hands are super duper shaky today. I have had a 5-day migraine. Thank God I woke up and today it was gone. 5 days, y'all. So these are the pieces for our flying geese units. We are ready to start sewing after all of that. 24 minutes. Yes, I love me some color catchers. Karen, I love the texture, and I love the little extra shrinkage I get too from not pre-washing. Thank you, Teresa. All right, are y'all ready to start sewing? Debbie said, new quilts are here. Awesome. How many colors will there be in the entire quilt? So if you look at page 1, before we switch over, if you look at page 1, I'm kind of fashioning my color scheme towards the example on the front. So if you wanted to do that, you'll notice there's maybe 8 or 9 different colors all together. But by all means, I suggest making up your own color palette and use as many colors or as few colors as you want. Okay, so we're going to be setting up a 1/4 inch seam allowance, y'all. If you're using a thicker thread, you might want to use a scant 1/4 inch. I am going to scoot this over just one little notch. All right. We're ready to start sewing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to sew the green side. So let's flip these green sides right on over onto the burgundy triangles. And what you'll notice is that the green triangle is longer than this side of the red triangle. The extra little tip I want you to put towards the top of the triangle. Okay, that's going to go in our seam allowance at the top. So when you line up your pieces, I want you to line up this bottom edges of both nice and flush like that. You will have the extra tip at the top of your burgundy or whatever color you're using triangle. See that? There you go. All right, we're switching over to the sewing machine, and I'm just going to start doing a bunch of chain piecing. We're going to sew together these green pieces first. All right, so see that? The bottom edge is lined up. The extra tip is at the top. Now I find it easier to sew it together like that with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So there's our first one. I'm going to bring over the next one. We're going to line up this bottom edge of both. And make sure all of our edges are nice and straight. And the straighter you line everything up, the more success you're going to have in all of your pieces being the right size. Oh goodness. Hold on a second, y'all. Of course, we have some shenanigans going on. All right, hopefully are we still there? Glory. All right, hopefully that stops that. We'll see. Again, we're lining up the bottom. Making sure this edge and this edge is nice and straight with each other. And we have one more. And I know it seems like this block is very time consuming, but I am going really slow for those of you who might be extremely new or like really nervous about making this block. So there's our first 4 seams. Okay, we're going to take this off. We're going to separate these pieces and we're going to go give them a press before we add the 4 beige pieces. Okay, let's come over here. Cutting that. There we go. Let me warm up this iron. She's been asleep for most of the morning. We're done with all of our cutting. So I'm going to go ahead and scoot this right on over. I have some gadgets to show you here in a little bit, but I'm going to move those out of the way. There we go. There we go. Move that. Move that. And we'll move that. All right. Pressing the seams. If you ask 5 of us might tell you different ways that they like to press the seams. For me, I like to press my seams towards the smaller piece. Okay, that's just me. If you like to press towards the bigger piece, by all means, do that. If you like to press your seams open, by all means, do that. There we go. We're going to press all 4 of these seams. I finally changed out the fabric. It was quite dirty on my pressing board here. I did remember to do that. That was getting quite gross. But I use lots and lots of glue. And I get glue on my pressing board a lot, so. All right, I'm just finger pressing that over and then giving that a quick press. Now we can line these back up the way we had them, right? Just like that. And then we can bring in our beige triangles. And remember, the longer side of the triangle goes towards that middle piece. Just like that. So when we bring these over to the sewing machine, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to flip this over, and we are lining up the bottom edges of both of these pieces. And your extra should stick off the top. Okay? We're going to take this over to the sewing machine. All right, so bottom edges lined up. I can line it up a little bit better than that, Lisa. And the extra tip is sticking out the top of this flying geese unit. And we're sewing these. I'm trying not to have my hands in the way. Glenda, I got my Christmas fabric at Sunshine Quilt store. I went there the other day with Miss Sheila. We had a little shopping trip. But a good majority of the fabrics I'm using is not Christmas themed. So I'm mixing it up, but just by using colors and applique theme, we're going to make this a Christmas quilt. That's our second one. I did, well, I forgot to upload the picture, but I did take a picture of the salvage edges of these fabrics, but I forgot to upload the picture this morning. That's our third one. We're bringing in the last flying geese unit now. You might find it helpful to glue baste these seams. I'm a huge advocate for glue basting if that helps you, or you might want to throw a pin in here to help keep these nice and lined up, whatever you feel more comfortable with. Whatever helps you stay more precise and accurate, I'm all for it. All right, we can separate these pieces. We're going to take these over and press these open. Or in my case, I'm pressing towards the smaller beige triangle. Okay, so let's flip this over. I like to give it a little finger press. Because we cut these on the bias of the fabric, they are a little stretchy. So I want you to keep that in mind. I don't want you to really stretch the fabric when you're pressing. I want you to press up and down, not push with your iron. That could make your flying geese units a little wonky, right? Just be mindful when pressing. So once we're done, we should have a 1/4 of an inch between the top of that burgundy triangle, in my case, and the edge of our block. There should be that 1/4 inch seam allowance right there. We're being firm, yet not too firm when pressing these pieces. So that's our flying geese units, y'all. Again, these finished flying geese units should measure 2.5 inches by 4.5 inches if you want to make them a different way. Miss Becky, I'm a huge advocate. I love my Elmer school glue in either glue stick form, which I like the clear glue stick, and you'll see me use that here in a little while with the bias binding, or the Elmer's school glue in the wet glue version. I use both. The little blue pieces of fabric are called leaders and enders, and I actually have a video here on my channel of some of the top reasons why I use those, and that'll go through and pretty quickly all the reasons why I use those little scraps when I start and end sewing the seams. So on YouTube, search Lisa Capen Quilts or Lisa Capen leaders and enders, and the video should pop up. All right, so here's our 4 flying geese units. Perfect. We're ready to snowball some corners, okay? So I want you to take a look, if this helps you remember, at this diagram here. This is where we're snowballing these 4 beige, in my case, 2.5 by 4.5 inch pieces, right? These are solid pieces. I'm just going to lay them out just like this. This diagram might help you remember if you're sewing later on. And then we're going to take our little 1.5 by 1.5 inch squares, and we're going to put them on the bottom left corner of each one of these pieces with the little line that we've already pre-drawn on it. That line needs to be going just like this. Not this way, but this way. Okay? And you can go ahead and just set them there so you don't get mixed up and turned around. We're going to be sewing directly on that line, okay? Not to one side or the other. We're sewing directly on that line. So let me move my needle up. I'm going to put on an open toe foot. Maybe you might be able to see a little bit better for that part. Maybe. I have to figure out a new camera position since my old camera stopped working for no apparent reason this morning. We're bringing over these pieces. We want to make sure that they're lined up exactly on the raw edges, right? Just like with the flying geese units, you want them exactly lined up to your piece, and we're sewing right on that line. So there's our first one. There's our second. Again, if you find it helpful to throw a pin in there, by all means, you can certainly do that. Right on that line. And that's our fourth one. I am going to put on this 1/4 inch foot one more time because we're still using a 1/4 inch seam allowance to piece together these blocks or these pieces. We can separate these little units. And now we're going to take these over. I forgot we do have one little bit of trimming to do. Back and forth, back and forth. Here's my little ruler that Sheila got me. Let's pull that over one more time. We're going to be taking these units and we're going to be trimming off this section right here of that little square, right? But we're going to leave a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we're going to take this and with a line, the 1/4 inch line of any of your rulers, you're going to line that up to the sewing line and we're going to cut beyond that sewing line, leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So let me hold that up just like that. See that? You're going to do that for all 4 pieces. And that goes by pretty quickly. And then all of the pre-work will be done for this block, and we're going to start sewing together this block. This block will actually come together like a 4-patch once you get all of the elements sewn together. Thank you, Sally, for taking care of that. Marilyn asked about the measurements of the flying geese unit. Let me scroll up past that. The finished size of the flying geese units is 2.5 by 4.5. Thank you, Sally. I'll tell you, I've had a time with spammers on the internet here lately. Okay, let's move on over. We're going to press this. Okay, so we have 4 seams to press. Again, you can press that open if you want, right? You can flip it over, open up that seam, and press it open if you want. Let's go ahead and do that. So this finished piece will also be 2.5 inches by 4.5 inches, right? And now we have a pretty nice, precise little triangle right in that corner. I would say if y'all are looking for dates, I probably would not check out that site. Yeah, they are persistent, aren't they? We're just pressing these pieces. They must love them some Lisa Capen. I don't know why else they would just like target my live. There we go. We're going to press that seam. I like to press from both sides. That's just me. And again, y'all see I'm not pressing the iron. It's just an up and down motion. I don't want to make any of these pieces wonky. I do take my fingernail and work that seam a little bit from the back just to help open it up, and then give it a press from both sides. It might be Sheila, but it happened occasionally before then. So, and Lady Fair is right. They target anybody who's live. That's what they do. All right, so here are the sections that make up this block, right? We have 4 of these and 4 flying geese units. Over here, let me scoot this down, is how we're going to sew them together. So we're going to take a flying geese unit and make sure to pay attention to which way this little triangle is going, right? So the triangle gets added so that it's touching the green. So keep that in mind when you're arranging all of your pieces. We're going to take these 2 pieces and flip this top one right over on top. And we're sewing that with a 1/4 inch seam, and we're going to do that for all 4 of them. Okay? Lots of little sewing with this block. I'm just going to make sure they're nice and lined up. There we go. And we're sewing these seams. You can cut these little dog ears. If that gets on your nerves, just cut them off at this point. Without switching back and forth, I'm just pulling these pieces over. Again, pay close attention to your arrangement. Get them nice and lined up, and sew. Bring in the 3rd one. We're going to flip this over. And sew. And the 4th one, y'all. Double check. Now let's separate these 4 pieces. And let's press these seams. So we're going back. Connie said, did you pre-starch? Sally, I did starch my fabrics, but I did not pre-wash them. I didn't pre-wash any of my fabrics, but I did starch them very lightly before cutting out all of these pieces. All right, I am going to go ahead and just take a pair of clips and get rid of these little dog ears that are in the middle of this block right there. I'm using the snips because all of my scissors are at my cutting mat on a different table. We're just going to eliminate all this extra little bulk right in there. You can even come in and cut these little dog ears as well. Just be careful, you don't want to cut into your pieces at all, right? Trimming, trimming. So there we go. I've made a big, huge mess there. I used flannel, and it's going to, of course, cling to all of that. All right, so let's open up this unit. And the way that I'm going to press these is naturally, because we have this point coming here with all of these seams right in the middle, naturally that seam wants to go towards this section of the block. So that's how I'm going to press mine, okay? I'm just going to flip this piece right on over and just do a nice little finger press without stretching, and we're going to press these 4 seams just like that. I do need a lip roller. I will have one next week. I can guarantee you it's over there. I just don't want to get up. All right, we're flipping over and pressing. Little Creek Homestead. Yes, you will be able to watch the replay whenever you want to come back. It'll be here on my channel. And all of the videos for this series, I have created a playlist. So you'll be able to go from week 1 to week 2, all in a playlist. And hopefully you won't have to search around for each one of the videos. They'll just be lined up. Scrunchions, I'm not sure if this block was sort of fashioned after another block, and I forget the name of that block, with a slight twist, okay? The original block didn't have the snowballed pieces here. It was just this block without these snowballed pieces, and I forget the name of that block. But the reason I chose this block is because I kind of wanted it, since we're doing a Christmas theme, I kind of wanted it to look like a piece of candy, right? Like a little peppermint or something. So that's the reason I chose this block and added the little snowball corners. It's kind of hopefully to make it look like a little piece of candy. So here are our 4 pieces. And down at the bottom, that little diagram is going to help you if you're working later. So we're going to now assemble the 4 patch. That diagram is going to help make it so that you arrange your pieces exactly right. And there we go. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to flip this over and flip this over. And we are sewing these 2 seams with a 1/4 inch. And while we're still there, you might want to come back and press these seams first, but while we're still there, to avoid switching back and forth, I will then sew the very middle seam. All right, so we're sewing this first seam. We're just going to line up the edges nice and straight, right? Bring over the second set. Again, you might want to take these over and go ahead and press them. When you do, you might find it easier to press the seam. See these seams? When you look at the back, it's automatically, because of this seam here, going to want to go towards this triangle. That's the way that I would press it. And I'm just going to do a finger press right here at the sewing machine. I might even take my fingernail and just gently just burnish that seam a little bit. Just flip it over. And I'm just burnishing. I'm not stretching. I'm just making that seam behave temporarily. And there we go. We have one seam that's going to join these, right? There you go. We're going to flip this right on over. Because I've been pressing these seams to the side, this middle seam will have seams going in opposite directions. And that's going to help me really lock in that center point right in the middle. See that? See that? The lighting might not help you see so much. Now we're just going to keep this lined up from one end to the next. And that is the last seam to complete this block. So let's come on over here for a minute. There we go. Isn't that pretty? Look at there, look at there. So let's take a look at this back, because you might be wondering how in the world to press with that very middle seam being so thick, where all of, it's like a pinwheel, all of those seams come together in the middle. I personally like to fold it back in half like this, and there's a seam on both sides that run right here. I like to cut the little stitches right there on both sides, and we're going to open up the very middle seam. To me, that's just what I find easiest to do. There should be 2 or 3 little stitches beyond that 1/4 inch. Just go ahead and snip those out. And you might have to finesse and work it a little bit, but after you snip it, that seam should open up just like that, okay? So you're going to end up with this little baby pinwheel right in the middle of your block. I'm going to try to hold that open or closer so you can see that. That's going to give us a little bit of a flatter middle section of our block. Again, I'm not stretching anything. I'm just working these seams, trying to get them to behave. And then I press. I'm a steamer, so I might even hit it with a little bit of steam. And then let's flip it over and give it a nice little press from the front. So there's our finished block number 1. I think she's pretty. The beauty of watching on the replay is that you can pause the video and kind of sew along with me even if you're not here during the live, right? So you can do one section, pause the video, and then move to the next section. And there is our finished block. It should measure 8.5 by 8.5. I'm going to bring over the batting and the backing, which again, if you weren't here for the very beginning, during this quilt project for all the blocks, I like to make my batting and my backing a little bit bigger than the finished block, and we will square that up after it's quilted. Sometimes if you do some really dense quilting, and I'm going to show you a really good example. If you do some really dense quilting, it might cause your block to shrink up ever so slightly. This blue block is the same exact block, right? This measured 8.5 by 8.5 before I did a lot of quilting on it. It is trimmed to exactly 8.5 by 8.5, but you'll see I have a little bit of batting exposed and backing because I did so much quilting, it drew in the fabrics of the block. That's why I like to have a little bit of bigger batting and backing to do my quilting. Now, if you don't do as much quilting on your block, you might not ever experience that issue. Okay, so let's see, how am I going to quilt this? I think to keep this one really simple, I'm just going to do some straight line quilting, and I'm going to quilt the 4-patch. And then maybe I will quilt right along the edge of the shape of this block. I think that'll be pretty. I encourage you to put on your free motion foot like I did and do some meandering or do some just free motion straight lines. Have fun. Yes, have fun with it. For today's video purposes, I'm going to keep it really simple. I'm going to put on my open toe foot, again, hoping that you can see a little bit better. I'm going to move the needle right in the middle. My stitch length is set at 2.4. I'm using a straight stitch. You can glue base these layers together if you want to. I find that a lot of the times the batting holds everything in there pretty nicely, but you might want to baste your layers, much like I did for the blocks of all the things before you start quilting. All right, so let's bring this over to the sewing machine. And I'm going to stitch right along that seam of the 4-patch. We might still have a little bit of thickness right in the middle, even though we opened that up. We'll see. I'm just going to slow down ever so slightly and get right through that middle section. So there's our first quilting seam. Now I'm going to come back and go the other way. My foot wants to catch the raw edge of that block. So you could go with just that. I think that would be wonderfully quilted for this block. I'm going to carry it a little bit further, and I'm going to quilt along the outside shape of all of the sage and the maroon pieces. So for that, I'm going to start right here. And I'm just sewing right outside of that seam. I am going to do a little locking stitch right there just to lock in the quilting. I think there's probably a million different ways that you could quilt this block. I think these spaces offer some really creative spaces to do some quilting. And we are almost back to where we started. And because we have that line that extends to the outside of the first seam that we did, I'm just going to lock that right there. And we will cut away. Where's my little snips? I don't know what I do with my snips. We need to trim the little thread right here from where we started. So let me grab, oh, here they are. Let me grab my 8.5 by 8.5 inch ruler, which I forgot to get it. Because at this point, this is where we want to go ahead and square up our quilt, right? Or square up our quilt block is after it's quilted. Mary Jo said, are you using a thread color that matches the cream fabric? I did. I tried to pick, and that's really a personal choice, right? You might want your quilting line to show up, right? I picked a thread color that kind of blends in with this background color. So let's go ahead and square this up. I'm just using my OmniGrid ruler, and I kind of have to stand up to see this part. At this point, this is when I like to square up everything nice and square. Just like that. And I'm trimming off all the extra batting and backing. Let me turn it around. Any exposed batting is going to be covered or go in the seams of our, when we join it to other blocks, right? So I'm okay with that. And there we go. There's our finished block number 1. 8.5 by 8.5. Now, one of the things I wanted to demonstrate during this first video, okay, is how we're going to join the blocks in this particular quilt. Again, I urge you to join them. You might like the way we joined the blocks in all the things. That was a totally different method. In this series, I'm going to use something different. All right, so to join the blocks, I'm not going to actually do it with this one because we don't have block number 2 to join it to, right? To join the blocks in this quilt, we're going to, this is just 2 practice blocks. We're going to join them so that the seam is exposed on the front of our quilt, which sounds crazy, right? It sounds crazy. So to do that, we're going to take both of these blocks and we're going to put the back sides together. See that? Back sides together. We're going to line them up and we're going to sew this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So let me switch this foot one more time. There we go. I like to throw my little leader in there, and we're going to move over to a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're going to line these blocks up nice and straight. And we're sewing with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, I'm using Warm and Natural batting, which is super thin. You might find that you need to bump up your stitch length, though, to feed all of these layers through there. So I'm going to use a stitch length 2.4. Just going to help evenly feed this through. You might also find it helpful to use a walking foot. Now, I will say when it comes to batting and using batting in your quilt, you might want to stick with a batting that's predominantly cotton because we're going to be doing some pressing with the batting. And if you use a batting that's all polyester, it might be heat sensitive. But see how that seam is exposed on the front? I want to go ahead and just try to give that a press real quick. So let's bring this back over. Yeah, just see how changing the color and the fabrics of the block give it a totally different look, right? So there you go. You could repeat this block and make an entire quilt just from this particular block. Wouldn't that be pretty? All right, so I'm just going to take my finger right in this seam. I'm going to try to work it open a little bit. I do want to press this seam open and try to make it as flat as possible. And I'm just really working my finger right in that seam. And I'm going to take my iron, which might have fallen asleep, and I'm going to go right in there and press that seam flat. I might even use a little steam. There we go. Now to cover that seam, I'm going to use some double folded bias tape. So on this first page, when you see 1 yard sashing fabric, I'm talking about the fabric that we're going to use to sash, or to cover the seams where we've sewn these blocks together. It's going to look like sashing, but we're doing a super, super easy way, okay? We're actually just going to cover these seams with a piece of sashing made from double folded bias tape, okay? So let's talk about that for a second, because at this point, you have 2 options. It's up to you which way you want to do it, the finished look of your quilt. We're going to cover that seam on the front with our bias tape. You can do that by hand stitching the bias tape on the front, which is going to give you a very clean look on the back, right? The back of your blocks will look just like this forever if you hand stitch the bias tape on the front. Now, if you're like me and you lose patience with a lot of hand stitching, really the only hand stitching I like to do is decorative stitching with applique. I still have not developed a love for hand stitching binding, and I don't see myself developing a love for hand stitching this bias tape. So in that case, and this way will be much faster, we will machine stitch the bias tape down on both sides. So it's totally up to you. There's two different options. Just know if you machine stitch this bias tape down, that seam is going to show up on the back side of your quilt. So I want you to pay really close attention to the back side the way it is now. There's no stitch lines there from this bias tape. Very nice clean finish. I'm going to take a piece of this bias tape and I'm going to cut it, and I'm going to show you how to make this bias tape here in just a second. And because I left my scissors over there, I'm using my snips. I just cut a piece that's slightly bigger, right? I even still have my self-edge edge in there. I cut a piece that's slightly bigger. We can trim that up in a minute. Y'all know me. I'm going to take a little bit of glue stick. You don't have to do this. This just gives me a little bit better control. I'm going to lightly apply a little bit of glue on the back of this bias tape. I'm going to position it right over top of the middle of that seam. Right over top, and I'm going to dry that glue and baste this bias tape in place. You can pin it if you like. That's the only thing, Miss Connie, about this particular block is you do lose your points when you cover them up with the bias tape. And I didn't really think about that when I picked this particular block to put into the quilt, is that you do cover it with your bias tape. Really, this is the only block that you have that issue with throughout the whole quilt. But if you wanted to join your blocks so that the seam is showing on the back, you would not lose your points, but you're also committing to hand sewing the sashing, because you would not want the front of your quilt to have these little sewn lines that we're getting ready to do now. All right, so let's bring this over to the sewing machine. I think this is the last time we're going over to the sewing machine today. I think. And this is the last time I'm going to switch this foot, but I really do think, hopefully, that open toe foot might make it easier for you to see. Maybe not from this particular camera angle that I was forced to use this morning, but hopefully it makes it easier. I'm going to move my needle right in the middle of that foot. And again, I'm still using 2.4 as my stitch length. And you could get creative with this, right? You could use a blanket stitch, a zigzag stitch. Just keep in mind that all these stitches are going to show on the back side of your quilt. I'm particularly just going to use a straight stitch. You also might want to match your top thread with your sashing color, right? You also might want to fill a bobbin with a thread color that's going to match and blend in to your back fabric. That will help disguise this straight line of stitching, okay? I'm just going close to the edge on both sides. Again, I am using a contrasting thread, so you can see that, right? But if you picked a thread color that really blends in well, That's going to disguise it a lot. And let me show you what happens on the back over here, because I think the light's pretty good over here. See these straight lines? That's going to show up in the quilting of your block now if you machine stitch it. So again, if you use the contrasting thread to quilt your block and then switch the bobbin thread to a color that matches the background, that's going to hide it a lot. And that's probably what I'm going to end up doing, because I most definitely want to do these sashing strips by machine, but I don't necessarily want it to show up like my quilting, right? I do kind of want it to get disguised in there. So, and then we would just trim off the extra pieces from the top and bottom, nice and flush with our blocks, right? Just like that. And that's how I'm attaching my quilt as you go blocks for this particular quilt. So if you haven't tried that method, you might want to give it a try. You might want to use the same method that we did with all the things, and you might know of a completely different method that you want to use. This is what I'm doing. Miss Karen, I don't really so much worry about the glue gumming up my needle, because when you see me pressing that glue, it's really drying it. And so then it's just like sewing through Heat and Bond Light or Wonder Under or Seam a Seam. And I've never had an issue with it gumming up my needle. Now, you certainly don't want to sew through wet glue. You want to make sure the glue is dry. You should be good. All right, so that's how I'm joining my quilt as you go blocks. Of course, we haven't done block number 2 yet, so we're not doing that today, right? Here's block 1. However, block 2, let me just show you, is going to be the gingerbread man. So at the end of next week's video, we will add this sashing strip and join these 2 blocks. I'm going to join everything together with you during these videos, okay? But let me show you how to make the double bias binding. And really, I cut my binding strips or my sashing strips straight of grain, so they're not really stretchy. They're not stretchy. But we do fold it over 2 times, and it's called double bias binding. But this really isn't stretchy, because I did cut my strips, my 2-inch strips, straight of grain, not on the bias. Now, of course, you can vary the size of the strips you cut. On the first page, I said to cut 2-inch strips, but if you want a thinner bias binding, a thinner sashing strip covering your seams, by all means, you can do that. I think the general rule for double bias binding is cut your strip double the size of the finished binding tape that you want to use. Okay, so I wanted a 1-inch finished bias tape, so I cut 2-inch strips straight of grain right from the yardage. And this is 43 inches long, right? Just like you're cutting binding. Now, I did put in the description box this little tool that I'm going to use. I'm going to show you how to make the bias tape without it. But this little tool, this little gadget, really helps speed up the process. My friend Anitra, many of y'all know Anitra from the live chats before. She showed me a video, and I was like, yes, that's the way we're going to do the next quilt project. No Y seams in this quilt, Miss Lisa. No Y seams at all. No. Yeah, Teresa said, quilt as you go works better for me on my domestic machine. Awesome. Okay, so here is my 2-inch strip. I'm going to show you without this little gadget how to make your double bias binding tape. Is we're going to fold it in half, just like this. And we're going to press. This is just going to give us a little halfway mark. in our bias tape, right? And then we're going to open that up, and you're going to have a little crease right in the middle. So then you're going to fold your edges right to that middle folded line. And I just find it easier to do one side at a time. And you're just folding that raw edge right to that middle crease, right? And then you will do the same thing on the other side. You will fold that to the middle and press all the way down. Right? So you don't need the little gadget that I'm about to show you, but you might find it helpful. You don't need it though. So there is our double bias tape, right? Without a little gadget. Now they have all kinds of gadgets for making tape that is much quicker than that, right? So in the description box, and this was relatively cheap. It was like under $10 and you got all of this, right? You got this ring with like 10 different sizes of tape makers. And then it also came with this more traditional set of tape makers. And it also came with a spool of pins, which was absolute garbage. And I threw it away because none of the pins, you might be able to see on the little package. It came with a spool of very pretty, colorful pins, but they were garbage. Hopefully, if you order this, your pins will be better than mine were. But mine didn't even have pointy tips. So those got chunked. But the bias tape makers are awesome, okay? I'm going to go through here and find the 1-inch bias tape. There's like 10 different sizes in here. Here we go. And they're on a binding clip. You just take it off. All right. Strumshin said your fingers need oven mitts. They do. Okay, so here is my 1-inch bias tape maker. And you're going to start the bias tape exactly the way I showed you, just to get it started. But let me show you what I like to do. Because to me, working with bias tape that wants to keep popping open is frustrating for me. It's so frustrating. So let me show you the difference. What did I do with that other bias tape? Here we go. See this bias tape and how it's laying predominantly mostly closed and nice and neat, right? And this one that we've just pressed and it wants to pop open like that. I like working with this much better. So once I get it started, right? We have a little section started. You know me. And I'm not using a lot. I'm very lightly swipe, right? Let's close that up and give that a press. And all it really is like having a whole bunch of extra hands working with you. See how it stays nice and flat now? Okay, so we're going to fold in, and I like working with these edges facing up. So with that opening facing up, we're just going to thread this little bias tape maker. And you really only have to do a small section just to get it started. So it just folds in like that. And then we don't have to fold in half and fold in the sides. I'm going to take a little swipe of glue. Not a lot, y'all. I'm going to put my little iron right there. I like taking my fingers and just pre-fold this up and run this bias tape maker right down. See that? See how easy that is? And you're just pressing. See how it stays nice and closed? We're going to do this whole 43-inch strip really quickly. Just a single little swipe of glue. Slide it straight on down. Straight on down. we get perfectly folded bias tape. Now the fancy one that Anitra showed me, which was a lot more money, you could actually use your iron and just press that tool right on down your strip. These will melt. I found that out. They're not heat sensitive. So I don't use my iron and push that tool down, but it does speed up the process. See that? But there's lots and lots of different bias tape makers out there. If you're looking to speed up the process of making this sashing, you might want to just watch some YouTube videos, reviews of different bias tape makers. Primarily, they're all doing the same job. But look at that. Nice and perfect bias tape. Joy, we are still live. Yes, ma'am. We are getting ready to finish up, though. I'm just showing how I'm going to make my sashing for all of the sashing pieces for this quilt. This is what I'm doing, so I don't have to show you. We're getting this done in the very first video, just showing how I make the tape. And see how quickly we went through 43 inches of bias tape, right? And because I used the glue stick, it really wants to behave. Now I didn't do a solid stream of glue. You see that? It's open a little bit. So it's not stiff, right? It's still very pliable, just like there was no glue. It's just the glue helps it behave. See that? You don't have to use the glue. So that's how I'm making my sashing strips. Here is block 1. And that's going to go over just a little bit, like that. Pretty, right? Now, do y'all have any questions? Do the other pieces work the same? So, yeah, all of these work exactly the same, okay? I did use the, what was it, the 1.5 inch, or one of these, the last time I made quilt binding, which was just double folded, right? But yeah, if you click on the link down in the description box, I believe that listing has a video that shows you all about it too. Click through the pictures, and the very last one is a video. And then you have the traditional tape makers as well that came with it. So altogether, you have like 15 different sizes. I got these off of Amazon, so I did share a link down in the description box. These make exactly the same kind of tape. They're just shaped differently. Karen, for block 1, you're going to find that down in the description box as well. So all the links will be down in the description box. I feel like that was a lot of sewing for one day, right? But yeah, there we go. There's our finished block 1. She's all squared up and waiting for block 2. For block 2, the pieces, we're doing applique next week. And you'll be able to get those tracing templates on Wednesday next week. Okay, so keep an eye out for that. If you haven't subscribed, that's the easiest way to get notified when I upload that thumbnail. It should, not always, doesn't always do it, but you should get notified when I upload thumbnails. So in case you forget, you should get a notification and you can grab your pieces, pre-cut them, and come sew with us on Fridays. Yes, thank you so much to my moderators. Y'all had some work to do today. Thank y'all so much for keeping an eye on the chat. I surely, while I can, it's not my favorite thing to do, going live without moderators. Y'all help me out so much, and I appreciate you so much. Becky King says, how do you feel about using monopoly invisible thread for sewing on the binding? If you're really wanting to use the invisible thread, I am probably the worst person to ask because I particularly, and we're all different, so don't let me stop you from trying it. But I particularly don't like sewing with invisible thread. It's just so persnickety for me. But you know, I have shaky hands. I have a hard time seeing the clear thread. I have a hard time usually adjusting my tension for it. My stitches don't usually look right. I just have a hard time with clear thread. Even the smoky invisible threads. I have a hard time working with it. So I'm the last person you probably want to ask. What I would do is try it for yourself first, Becky, and form your own opinion about it. I find even the clear or even the smoky invisible threads have a shininess to them. So when I'm sewing, particularly on some darker fabrics, sometimes the lighter fabrics, I see what looks like a plastic thread. That's just me. Where I just love, if I don't want to see the stitch as much, matching the threads as close as possible to whatever fabric I'm using so it just blends in. For me, that's what I like to do. Again, we're all different, so don't let me stop you from trying it if you want to. That's just my thoughts on it. Y'all are so welcome. Y'all are so welcome. Sheila said, I need to wash my van, but now I want to sew. I hope I did put you in the mood for sewing. I hope I did. I hope you find that this project is something that gets you excited. Maybe you've been in a lull. Maybe if you're like me and you make big quilts, these smaller quilts are great to work on at little bits of time, something to break up the bigger quilts, right? Y'all, I make big quilts as part of my business. I make t-shirt quilts for people. And they're time consuming, and they're big, and they're heavy. It is so nice and refreshing just to break up the large quilts with a small block here or there, right? And it helps me stay excited about the bigger quilts. So I highly encourage you to sew along with us. I'm so glad you learned a lot from this first class. It was a lot to throw in there. But I'm hoping, you know, this video is going to be much longer. I'm hoping to keep the videos at about an hour. And many of the videos, especially if you're watching on the replay, you'll be able to fast forward through different sections. You might not have to watch the whole thing. But I wanted to cover a lot in this first one, like how we make the sashing tape, how I plan on sewing the blocks together. So next week, we're making the gingerbread man. We'll do the applique, we'll quilt it, square it up. We're going to join it to block 1, and I won't so much have to go into a lot of details about how I made the tape, right? I'll just say, go to video 1, we made the tape, and I'll show you at the end of the video. This is going to be the longest video, maybe until we get to the end, right? Denise, it's your dinner time. I hope you're eating something yummy for dinner. Lori said, my flying geese look perfect. First time. Yay! Lori, I'm so proud of you. Good job. I highly encourage you to try cutting your squares, cutting them at the 7/8, right? 2 7/8 by 2 7/8, and cutting on the diagonal. It does add a level of difficulty that you might not be comfortable with yet. Pull out some scraps and practice cutting that 7/8. And then, because you're working with bias pieces now, right, that are stretchy, that might be something new for you. Give it a try. And if you cannot get it and you're just ready to quit, try making the flying geese units in a different way. There's a million different ways to do it. You just want a finished flying geese unit that's 2.5 by 4.5, right? That's what you need. However you end up making it, doesn't matter. I do want to push you in your sewing, but not to the point where it's going to make you give up, okay? So if you make your flying geese units in any other way, we are all good with that. Thank you, Jesus said, I'll enjoy longer videos. Feels more like sewing with friends. Me too. Not everybody likes the longer videos. Oh, I'm twitching on the screen. And I get it. I do. But usually, you know, if you're just watching on the replay, skip around and just get the little bits that you need to get you on your way, right? And then the long 1 hour and 42-minute video, just break it up, catch the sections that you need. I personally like the live format because I've gotten to know so many of you, very, very, very well. And this is our time together in the week, right? Yeah, sitting and talking with friends. Yes. Yeah, Sheila said, if you're in the Creative Crew group, we sometimes Zoom together. So if you haven't joined Creative Crew, the link is in the description box. All right, everybody. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. My weekend is going to be about as busy as this past week has. Busy. Busy's a good thing, though, right? I am not complaining, but I am busy. I have a quilt to quilt for a client. I have a binding to put on for a client. I have some labels to sublimate. I have a photo to sublimate this weekend. And I have some business stuff on the back end of stuff that you don't think about, right? When you just think of having a sewing business or a quilting business. But there's all this business part on the back end you don't think about. I have to deal with some of that stuff this weekend. So all exciting, but busy. I hope you have fun. I hope you take at least a portion of this weekend and try this block. And if you do, share a picture of it. We all want to see on the Creative Crew. Share your block. If you have questions, that's a great place to post questions to as well. All right, everybody. I've really enjoyed coming back after our camping trip, getting to hang out with you this week. Be safe this weekend. I look forward to seeing you next Friday. Bye, everybody.